Hey, today I'm going to show you how to paint the eyes using oil paint. I'm going to use various footage that I have saved, and I'm going to explain how I approach painting the eyes. I'm doing these videos for free. It takes a long time to put everything together. Please like my video, comment, or share it with your friends. It helps a lot, and I hope this video is helpful. You'll find it useful, and it would advance your understanding of oil painting.
Let's look at the light. This is the most important concept to understand to be able to draw and paint the eyes realistically. You need to pay attention to the light direction and how it passes through the eye. And here we can see how the light passes through the eye. There is always a highlight on one side of the eye, and then the light goes through the eye, and we see a little bit of a reflected light or lighter area on the opposite side of the eye. We see the highlights on the skin as well. All of the highlights accumulate on one side of the eye following the light direction. In this picture, the light passes through the eye from left to right, and we can see a tiny highlight on the left side of the eye. And when the light passes through, we can see a little bit of light on the opposite side of the eye. This is extremely important to make it look realistic when you start painting. In my paintings, you can see how I apply this concept to my art. You can see that I always have a highlight and some of the reflected light on the opposite side of the eye. And then there is always a shadow under the upper eyelid. This is also very important to put it in, even if you don't see it, because it gives the eye a three-dimensional quality. Now let's look at some footage of me painting the eyes, working on different studies. I begin working on my paintings by painting the eyes first, and I place the iris first. I pay attention to the roundness of the shape. They must be round, and they get partially covered by the upper eyelid. This is super important to catch. If you make them round and if you don't cover them up by the upper eyelid, the eyes are gonna stare at you. That's why I make basic circles for the irises, and then I start shaping the eyelids. Also, the pupil is always in the center of the iris of the eye, and I use a mix of black and dark brown or black and dark blue to fill in the pupil. It depends on the overall color scheme and the light, but it's never pure black because black is just too dark. There is always a little bit of color in the blackness or the whiteness that we see. I also mark the brightest lights or the highlights in the iris, and then I begin painting the eye going around the iris. I work from dark to light. That means that I fill in all the shadows first, looking at the value and color temperature, and then I leave space for the middle tones and the lights. The white space that we see around the iris of the eye is not quite white, and most of the time it's not white at all. It always consists of some lighter colors that you have to see in your reference. If you paint that area pure white, the eyes are not gonna look natural, they're going to stare at you. Next, it's important to capture the upper and lower eyelids. If you think of it in basic terms, it's like having a couple of lines at the top of the eye and the bottom of the eye. Usually students don't do it, and that's why the eye doesn't look natural. Always include the second line to define the eyelids. The eyebrows help us define the shape and the position of the eye, and that's why it's also important to paint it right away. I always soften all the edges before quitting the painting session. In this video you can see me layering paint in the second or third session, meaning that I have the basics going and now I go back to my painting and begin refining it and putting in the detail. If something goes wrong, I can use a little bit of medium like linseed oil to wipe it off my panel, and so the previous layer is going to stay there if the paint is really dry. And that's how you can fix a lot of mistakes, by wiping off the paint using a little bit of medium. And this is the actual progression of me painting the first layer. You can see how slow that is. Here you can see me painting in a different color scheme. And see, I always start with the darkest darks to define the shapes. And then I begin tiling or filling in the areas right next to those darks to create volume. I always think of the roundness of the form and how it looks around, in our space, and I try to imagine that while I'm painting, to capture that roundness. Also pay attention how I keep changing my stroke direction to describe form. here I keep layering paint to describe the darker part of the area above the eye. I often start painting on toned panel. It has at least two advantages. First of all, it's easier to find the darkest darks and the lightest lights. And secondly, colors react differently to the toned surface, as you can see here. And here are some tips. I use wax paper on top of my palette and I mix all the colors on wax paper. Again, the palette itself is the middle tone. It's just very easy to mix and to clean up after the session. I don't have to scrap off the paint off my panel. I can just throw it out, and if I have paint left, I basically close it with a different piece of wax paper, and that's how I can keep it fresh for at least a couple of days. In this section, I have a couple of tips for you. First of all, I often rotate my canvas or panel to get the stroke going in the right direction. A lot of times it's just very difficult to make the right kind of stroke, keeping the panel the way we usually paint. And the second thing is to use some sort of a stick to stabilize your hand when you paint, because when I start painting the details, you know how hard it is to make a straight line or to make all those teeny tiny details. This way, you minimize the shaking that happens. Use a very nice, clean and soft brush to blend some of the areas. I normally do it right after I'm done painting for a day, and I do a little bit of blending by caressing the panel with the brush. And here you can see some of my finished studies. These are small panels, 5 by 7 in size. If you'd like to learn more drawing in colored pencil or painting in oil, consider going to my website and enrolling into these classes. You can watch these lessons at your leisure time. There is no due date, and learning never ends.
Thanks for watching this video. Please like, comment, share. I appreciate it very much. Take care. Bye-bye.